This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, there we go. Great, excellent. Okay, thanks very much, everybody. So, first of all, communication strategy in support of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. One of the things that became obvious as we came to the end of the United Nations Decade on Biodiversity was that for all of the successes and the work in communicating and moving forward in the Aichi targets, including a question of awareness that I'll talk a little bit later, there needed to be more attention as strategies are put moving forward to incorporating and integrating communication in an overall perspective of the work of these strategies. That's one of the reasons we've had in the discussions of the working group, based on the COP decision, that parties want there to be an attention paid to incorporating communications, awareness and appreciation in the strategy overall. And so the process that we have now for the post-2020 global biodiversity framework includes that in a way that it didn't include for the Aichi biodiversity targets. So first of all, the one thing that we should understand when we're looking at what we're going to be doing the next stage as far as communication is take a look at what we did with regard to Aichi biodiversity target 1. We know that for the whole suite of Aichi biodiversity targets, not everything was achieved. Indeed, there's only a small number that were partially achieved. The Aichi target did realize a number of successes, notwithstanding the fact that we don't have records of 100% of the people around the planet being able to claim awareness. We did see over the decade a substantial increase in people's awareness of biodiversity, of the value of biodiversity, and indeed even an increase in people's awareness of the different values. I don't have time to go into all of the details here, but you'll note that in Global Biodiversity Outlook 5 that we released in 2020, we had records showing that there was an increase across different country levels. We saw some of that based on work that was done by the Union of Ethical Biotrades Biodiversity Barometer. Some of you might remember this key that was released over the course of the year. The Biodiversity Barometer did find that in a number of countries, we had substantial increases in this area. Furthermore, we had a study that was sponsored by WWF and the Economist Intelligence Unit in the fall of last year that also demonstrated a substantial increase in the level of understanding and appreciation of the values of biodiversity. Now, so before we rest on our laurels and say that was fabulous, something that's important to note is that these studies of awareness weren't complete. The UEBT study was carried out in perhaps a maximum of about 20 countries around the world. And indeed, the question set, while there was a core question set that was there were differences between all of them. And indeed, the methodology for it, while it's still fairly solid, it could be said that it should have been a little bit more broad. So indeed, it's increased, but the results are heterogeneous or heteronymous, and they don't cover the entire world. The Economist Intelligence Unit's Eco Awakening thing is also very recent. It doesn't have a long series of time data, so that's the other question. So what we know is that notwithstanding the fact that there's this increase, we need better data to cover it. Of course, the other part too that people will say is that, well, even if there was this increase in awareness, why did we not in turn see a much greater increase in people's actions to protect biodiversity? And so therefore, the increase in awareness did not appear to be matched by changes in behavior. It's for that reason that when you see the communications paper being discussed tomorrow, there's the notion to begin to really take seriously the notion of behavioral change with regard to awareness raising. So we'll hear a little bit more from our colleagues, Christine and Andreas, later on. But the first thing is that those of us who are aware of communication and behavior change, we know now for sure that it's important to understand that human behavior is embedded in a complex system of a lot of influences. And you can see right here, we are influenced by the economy, we're influenced by our moods in a given day, we're influenced by our social circles. And in fact, those sorts of matters of influence can have cross-cutting impacts on the information that we have and the sort of choices that we make. It's indeed the question of behavior change is not a simple matter of straightforward raising awareness makes people change their behaviors. If you know that biodiversity is being lost, does it automatically mean that you'll take the step? It doesn't indeed. So there's a more complex relationship between awareness raising and transformation. And so that's the second phrase. So the idea that being aware of the problem of biodiversity loss is not sufficient. So any communications actors going forward need to say that awareness is not the only part. Communication needs to take another thing. We need to have an impact on intentions and indeed on planning by actors as well. I'm not going to talk too much about that. There's some points mentioned in the comms paper that will be discussed, but in particular, we're going to hear more about that from Christine and Andreas later on in the presentation. So first, let's talk a little bit about what the scope and purpose is for the paper that you'll see before us as well. So the first thing to understand is that this communication strategy document being discussed now is really the first step. So what it does is it provides a structure for coordination amongst the really relevant actors. It's about how do we bring ourselves together to share stories and ideas, but more importantly, to share our ways of acting. So it's a coordination structure. The other thing too is that it's initial guidance to inform future work. While it's hoped that a strategy will be ready when the global biodiversity framework is adopted in Kunming, I think we all know that strategies that are developed at the global level will have to be hooked up with national strategies that will need to be subsequently developed. So the important part of the strategy is to create a global framework that is then used later on at national levels. And this is actually a dynamic we've seen throughout the negotiations. Any of you who followed the review mechanisms discussion, for example, know that parties are saying, right, we can get guidance from the global level, but we may need other directions at the national level as well. The third thing about the strategy is that, as something I just said now, it needs to promote behavioral change. And this behavioral change needs to support behaviors that will affect not just conservation. Again, we've got to remember the 3 objectives. We've also got to look at behavior change that supports sustainable use, the equitable sharing of benefits. And above all, if we're going to talk about transformative change in the framework, how does this communication strategy really communicate and bring about kind of transformative change? The other thing that we need to look at is a bit of an information feedback mechanism, which is to say that as the framework moves forward, people change their behaviors, actors change their behaviors, and we have other activities advancing. How do we have an interaction between reporting and behavior change as well? So the goals for the communication strategy really do mirror some of these main areas that we've got here. And we've just put them out here because they're very long. I invite you to take a look at the document. But first of all, the communication strategy has to be looking at what are the values of biodiversity. And we say values of biodiversity so that we're aware of the plural and multiple values of biodiversity that are held by people. And indeed noting that these are different across nations and other groups. For example, the previous strategy didn't pay, to be honest, a lot of attention to the values of biodiversity associated with Indigenous peoples and local communities. And so, in fact, the new strategy has got to ensure that that's part of it too. I think we can expect that the work that IPBES is going to be doing on values over the next little while will impact as well. The communication strategy actually, quite frankly, does need to look at the goals and the targets of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, because if this is what we're seeking to achieve, how does the communication strategy not just inform and tell people how we're doing, but do so in a way that encourages action and behavior and allows transformation and regulation by different people and partnerships? The third goal is the strategy needs to enable partnerships. What's different about the post-2020 global biodiversity framework compared to the Aichi targets is it indeed a strategy that's not just the CBD, it's meant to be all the biodiversity related conventions, and indeed it reaches out to stakeholders across countries. It's not just national governments, it's businesses, it's subnational governments, it's IPLCs, it's women, it's youth, it's everyone. So in fact, the notion of how to develop a partnership amongst all of these for this will be a big part of it too. And the final thing where we say address global challenges is that we need to be aware that the biodiversity domain that we're operating in is intimately related to climate change, water security, food security, and indeed earlier this week I talked with David Boyd, who's the UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights. It's related to the human rights agenda too, which means that this strategy has to not just talk about biodiversity as a self-contained isolated field, it has to show how this messages and work interrelates with others. We have to learn how to share. We have to learn that we're part of a bigger conversation moving on forward. Now, the strategy document right now, in terms of audiences, I have to be quite honest right now, it's just pretty well, everybody's an audience at that point in time. We know that we have to talk to the parties, but the parties have to be not, people to be communicated to, but also we have to enable parties to be able to reach out to stakeholders at different levels as well. We're also aware that because we're reaching out to a number of different audiences related to biodiversity, we need to look at other specialized audiences. The audiences question is something where we may have global areas, but it'll be specific to each particular country that'll move forward. And so we'll need to look at those areas. And in fact, we'll probably hear some of this from Andreas and Christine in terms of what audiences means about. So the messages, I'm not going to read through all of these right now, but as you can see, if you look at the messages here, they're, yeah? Sorry, you can't see the messages. Oh, so I've been talking and advancing my slides, and you guys haven't seen any of the slides advancing. Oh my gosh.
Just waiting to clarify that.
Thank you. No, thank you. Thank you very, very much. Yeah, thank you. No, very, yes, yeah. You all looked very intent. Some of you were still nodding as I was saying, like, okay, so obviously they're seeing what. Yeah, exactly. Let me start me. Well, that's good. Okay, that's okay. They can see my slide. Oh my goodness. My goodness. Okay, hang on a sec. Let me just do another view and see if it can work it that way. Thank you, Tom, very much. Thank you very much. This is one of the things where everyone's like, well, I don't know if I should tell the presenter that there's this problem. Is this that we should, you know, oops. Okay. Well, if I can't figure out the tech, and again, you know, this is the thing, we've been doing this by Zoom for all of these years, and yet we're not able to. It's funny because on my screen, I can see it. I can see it here. Oh my goodness. Okay, so I think we'll have to solve this problem for Andreas and everybody else here, because otherwise I'm going to have an issue. Let me try resume slideshow. No, it's not changing, is it?
No.
Wow. Yeah, the screen. Yeah, the screen's not advancing the slides.
The same happened on Zoom.
The same's happening on the Zoom thing here as well. No, I'm sharing it on GoToMeeting because this is a screen share from GoToMeeting. So, but actually, it tells me now that I can see your app here. Actually, for some of the colleagues online, can you see the messages slide yet? Okay, Andreas says go to presentation mode next to autosave on the first line. Okay. Does it make a difference there? No, it doesn't. Review. Right, because actually people online said that they do see the messages slide. Well, that's really curious. Slideshow, current slide. Yeah, that screen doesn't make the difference. Here, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a minute. Oh, that doesn't change the screen either. Okay, all right, let me try one more thing quickly, pardon me. Ah, now we have progress. Okay, there we go. So there we go. Thank you very much. Right. It's only taken 2 years of working online to have that.
No one's used to in-person interaction.
Exactly. It's the hybrid part that's normally I'm in my sunroom talking to the flotilla and I don't have to worry about this. So. Okay, so just quickly recounting. So that was the conversation about I just about biodiversity target number 1, the question about behavioral change. I will share the slides with all of you again, certainly, for sure. The scope and purpose, the goals for the communication strategy, audiences, and then the questions of the messages. So what I want to do is go back to the messages now. So the messages that you see here, they are both a continuity and a departure. A continuity in the sense that we had a decision on communication back in COP13 that looked at some of the key messaging areas for the convention as well. But these are meant to adjust and look at what we're talking about now in context of the post-2020 framework. So some of the elements are the same, which is to talk about connections, communicate connections of people to biodiversity, promoting action, highlighting milestones, so highlighting some of the time frame that you have to work. I think an important part is that there'll be the notion of equity as part of the work we do, and that's a new element that we're starting to see in our work as well. The other part is looking at the question of the framework and what does it mean for national development priorities? How does this framework make sense at the national level? The other part I think is novel now is the important role of how do we communicate how things are done at the local level? How do cities and subnational governments carry out actions as well? Because something that's very obvious to us is that much of the actions are taking place at that level where citizens have direct contact with their government. The other important part is that we're going to be looking at the values of target audiences. And this is the part where raising awareness and changing the behavior is related to multiple sets of values of people as well. And so therefore, these messages or things we work have to be understood in the context of a lot of these different value areas. The strategy, I think, will pay more attention to the notion of branding than we did previously with the Aichi biodiversity targets. With regard to branding, this will need to be developed, but you can see that there are a number of different elements. When you look at branding, it's not just about, say, your visual identity. You know, people say, for example, that Coca-Cola isn't just about the Coca-Cola look and feel of the label. It's about a variety of other things that connects it with others. So we need to look at is what's the voice of this global biodiversity framework going to be? What is it is. In this case, we want to talk about it being the efforts and the wishes for a future, because remember, the language about it is something that we're hoping to achieve. The identity of it is going to be consistent throughout the time. The other part is, what does it promise? What is the brand promise of this framework going to be? And it's going to be about what we're hoping to achieve by the end of the value. The values still, because it's part of the United Nations, we link to this. And then indeed, the question of targeting that I've just discussed for the different branding is that you're going to have to articulate this in several ways. And the framework itself is positioned in the context of a variety of other frameworks. So the important part is that this branding exercise will need to be carried out at the global level, but also at a variety of other levels going down further. The key principles for us developing the framework. So the first part is that it's iterative. So the document that we're looking at before the parties tomorrow is only the first stage, and it will need to change and transform. Just as for the global biodiversity framework, the notion is that goals and targets are set and that new information and new transformations will change the way we go. We'll also need to develop this in an iterative way. The other part that's going to be based on the notion of open source principles. Now, I talk about that because the experience that I've had in the Secretariat and a number of you who've joined the flotilla is this idea that organizations, if they develop products or ideas or campaigns, but they make them available to everyone in an open sharing way, increases reach, capacity, and the effectiveness of all of these. And that's the notion of open source, where a campaign would have ideas, values, but you wouldn't basically say that it has to have the branding of the original organization. So the target, the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, is something for everybody. So it might have the branding of the convention, it might have the branding of the government of the United Kingdom, it might have the branding of WWF, etc. Work on that. The other principle for this is that this strategy will indeed be developed along with consultations of a couple of people in particular organizations in particular. First of all, the Informal Advisory Committee for Communication, Education, and Public Awareness, that's SEPA there. That'll be a key presenting organization for this. And that's because that'll bring the parties on board. And indeed, that body is going to be quite large. The second thing is that there will be a role for this mechanism known as the Biodiversity Communications Flotilla. And that's a group that meets now, many of you here are part of that organization, that shares ideas on a weekly basis and explores some of the ways to move forward on communication. And it will be intimately involved in the way the strategy develops at all levels and moves forward as well. I'm going to stop right there because, you know, in addition to my messing up the slides, I think I've already talked longer than I wanted to. I wanted to have some time for my other colleagues to speak up as well. So let me just take a look at where we're at in terms of our timelines and how much time we've got available here. Thanks very much. Okay, so I think I'm there. Let me just take a couple of questions now from everybody. We've got, I think, about 10 minutes here. So I've got people from the audience. Now, I've got a microphone here too, so I'm going to pass it around. Hang on. Just pass it around. So, and when you give your question, just please introduce yourselves so we know who everyone is.
Yes, thank you very much for giving me the microphone. My name is Stéphane Paillet. I belong to the French delegation. So I'm a French-speaking person. Okay. So maybe there is something that I've not really understood. Sorry, of what you said regarding the process of endorsement of this strategy. It has to be endorsed by all the parties, or it's an internal document for the Secretariat. What is the process, and when do you think this communication strategy will start in the process of the preparation of the Kunming COP 2015? Sorry.
Great. Okay. Thank you very, very much. So the strategy document that I'm referring to here is before the subsidiary body and implementation. It'll be discussed tomorrow. So it will indeed have direct references from the parties. It's expected that that recommendation, when adopted by the SBI, will then be added to the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. So it'll be one of the supporting mechanisms. So it is meant to be carried out and recognized as an official part of it. So at the COP, when the entire package is adopted, the strategy will move forward. In terms of its implementation, so it is also meant to start moving immediately once the COP has happened. And you'll see in the document some of the initial steps. It's recommended that once the COP meets, there are immediately within the next few months the means to move forward and help to develop and flesh out parts of the strategy as well. So again, it'll be carried out by parties, but all are expected to become involved. So as soon as we finish with the COP in Kunming in September, you'll get to take a breath for about a week, and then we'll all need to roll up our sleeves and get started on implementing it. Thanks. Any other questions? Any other comments as well? You don't have to. Yeah, Tom, of course. Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm holding the mic, but I don't want to take advantage. Tom Dixon from Forest Peoples Programme. I'm here working with the Indigenous Caucus. I was just interested in the role of going forwards of the flotilla group, as you said, many of us here are members, and also then the advisory group. And if you could just maybe outline some of the differences, and who do you expect to be part of the advisory group? Would that be sort of parties, Indigenous representatives, NGOs as well? Thanks.
Yeah, exactly. So the Informal Advisory Committee for Communication, Education, and Public Awareness is, officially recognized advisory body under the convention. But the advisory body meets really not in a really regular basis. So it's expected that the advisory body will provide, advice, guidance on things like the strategy moving forward. But it's expected that the committee will also take reference to something like the communications flotilla for a lot of these activities. One of the strengths of the communications flotilla is that it can meet on a very regular basis. We meet almost every week. We have this very flexibility because we have consensus, and we've got the idea that you can adhere to some parts of the activities or not to others. And it's a very practical basis. I mean, in that meeting, we actually move forward on some really practical on-the-ground type of activities. And so that's something different from the Informal Advisory Committee, which will provide broad policy advice. So there's a role for both of them to move forward. Now, the Informal Advisory Committee is also going to be discussed at COP in the sense that parties have indicated that they want the group to be more expansive in its participation, which means that they want to make sure that there's a proper representative of parties from all regions. They've also indicated that they want to have an expanded presence for Indigenous peoples and local communities. And you and I talked about this, I think, in the hallway. It was even this morning we talked about, indeed, it's like, well, IPLCs are already there, but the idea is that can we make it broader and larger? I mean, the other thing, too, is to be quite honest, the IPLC is supposed to include full representatives of youth. We're supposed to have representative women. We're supposed to have representative business, all the stakeholders, and they aren't all there. So that group is going to need to get a little bit larger in that regard.
And the call for that will go out later on.
Yeah, so typically what we do is once the COP finishes, then we've got the mandate to move forward, because that decision on communications overall will say what we do. And so that's when we'll send out the call. So again, my idea is that I'll get off the airplane, sleep for a few hours, and then write the notification that brings nominations forward for everyone. But having said that, I think that's important for anybody here who's going to be involved with the SIPA as well. We should begin our discussions now about what kind of a configuration is possible as well. Because, for example, the government of France, I think we've had representatives sometimes on the SIPA, but not always. I think it would be really valuable to look at, a really dedicated. I think we had someone from who represented France. She was from the L'Aquarium à Brest, I think was one. There's an institution there, and that was the French representative for a while. So, thanks, Tom. Questions, comments? Yeah, please pass the mic on.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Ariane, and I work for RARE, which is an organization who has behavior change as its core with all of our programs. So first, I want to say congratulations that now communication is connected to behavior change, and that really promoting action is something. So while we go through this event, what I would also be interested is to see, like, how can we now link it even to, let's say, means of implementation, and not only communicate and encourage action, but really help also how to connect behavior change with conservation efforts more directly. So we obviously work with communities and use some of the behavioral insights or behavior-centered designs to help sort of communities move forward. So I would love to also then see in the upcoming presentations how we can use now the communication strategy to bring behavior change more into conservation actions as well. So just a pinpoint for the discussion.
Yeah, good. No, thank you very much for that. And I'm glad you're here, because over the course of the decade, we have had moments when we worked with RARE and been aware of RARE's work on behavior change in different communities. And so it'll be to look at that. I'm glad you're also saying it's like, listen, this is about implementation. It's about that other kind of monitoring too. And that's the other part we want to do, is how do we learn from what we're doing and make other transformations. So indeed, I think you'll be excited to see the work we're going to see from our other colleagues. Great. Thanks very much. No other comments? Maybe what I'll just say is those of you who are online, because we can hear you in the room, would you like to raise a question? You can do the typical flotilla style, which is just turn on your mic and speak. And I'll look at if I just see a sea of red people, red flags, then I'll know that's on. Okay, so they're just going to hold on. Great. Okay, well, listen. Well, thank you very much. We'll have more discussions later on. So what I'll do now is let me move to getting our colleagues' presentations ready to go. And hopefully I can manage the technology better. So thank you very much. So now it's my pleasure to introduce, it's a joint presentation. I'll ask Christine and Andreas to open your cameras here. So we're going to look at some work that's been done by WWF and the German Federal Agency for Nature Conservation on assessing awareness, but awareness and behavior change as well. We're getting a presentation from Dr. Christine Van Duren, who is the project director of the International Biodiversity Communication and Policy Project of WWF. And I believe this is funded by the International Climate Initiative, the IKI project as well. She's joined by Dr. Andreas Muis, who's a biologist and a psychologist who works for the German Federal Agency for Nature Conservation as well. So Christine and Andreas, I will turn the floor over to you. And then I guess I will let, who'll be the one who'll share the slides? Is that Andreas?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll make you the presenter. And let's see how this goes. And this time the people in the audience, you have to let us know if it doesn't show up properly. So, see, Andreas is better than I am. He got it to work the first time. Well done, Andreas.
Can you change one time the slide and ask into the room if everyone sees the change?
Let's make sure.
Thanks.
Yes,
Is
it does.
everybody
Yeah.
able to?
Yeah. You've done it very well.
Perfect.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so to eliminate echoes, I'm going to close my microphone. So Andreas.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, David. It's a great pleasure being here and presenting you our results and findings. And I'm doing this together with my colleague Christine van Doren. David gave us a brief introduction. Christina, would you like to say something more to you?
Yeah, thanks, David and Andreas. From my side as well, a sincere welcome to the audience in Geneva and also to the online audience. I was already introduced. I prepared myself to introduce myself here, but thanks, David, for that. So I think we can change to the next slide, please.
Okay, great. Then I'm handing over to Christine.
Before presenting the Biodiversity Awareness Assessment Tool, I would like to briefly describe the context under which the new assessment approach was developed. In the frame of an international WWF project, which aims to increase the biodiversity awareness worldwide and is financed by the German Ministry of Environment, a biodiversity awareness study was conducted in these here mentioned 10 countries, which represent over 50% of the global population and are biologically mega diverse. Germany is also mentioned here because the German Nature Awareness Study is being conducted by BFN since 2009 every year. The international baseline study in the 10 focus countries was conducted in 2018 by WWF on basis of an assessment method called the social indicator developed by BFN. For the international level, the questionnaire was adapted by WWF. Some of the results have been also published in the Global Biodiversity Outlook 5 under Aichi Target 1, which was mentioned by David earlier. In 2021, the assessment method was revised by BFN in cooperation with WWF Germany and the University of Applied Science Bielefeld. The new social indicator based on behavioral psychological theories was developed. At the end of 2021, the survey was conducted again with the new assessment tool. The results of the study are being currently analyzed and will be published during the CBD COP15. We will present you here today the new indicator and give you a brief sneak preview of some of the results. Next.
Thank you, Christine. What you're going to see now, we will present you in the next minutes the basic question, why to assess awareness at all? So why is it important on the national and global level? Christina will talk about the benefits for policy and decision makers, and what the topic of awareness means for international strategies. Then I will present you our basic ideas why to change the assessment of awareness and the history of environmental psychology, what environmental psychology achieved in the last 4 decades, and how these findings and scientific insights can be used and applied for better assessment of awareness. Then we will show you some basic results and a little sneak preview what we have found out in selected countries. So to give you a taste what will come out of our research, and we will close this presentation with some key messages. So why to assess awareness? I think we must not neglect or misunderstand that the human factor is key for saving biodiversity. In our environment, the colleagues we are working with, they are all very concerned with saving biodiversity, protecting plants and animals, and so on and so on. But I think we must be aware that the human factor is key, and that humans and the way they are interacting with each other and the world is causing loss of biodiversity. So I think one of the key points is to understand that human behavior and individual behavior is the key to all, to understand individual behavior and how individual behavior is spreading out to other levels of human society and our interaction with the world. So as you can see here on the slide, individual behavior is in the center, and individual behavior is characterized by psychological facets like attitudes, norms, and habits. And we will talk about this in this presentation. But this human factor in the center, it spreads out to others, to groups, how we interact in society, and then going further to more material aspects, technology or scientific endeavors or policy making. So everything that is more on a subordinate level. Taking all this together, we could name this interaction as a social practice. And changing social practices must be understood as a key for achieving global transformation or transformative change towards more sustainability. So as David lined out in his talk, that is a complex relationship between saving biodiversity and raising awareness. And I think, and we think, that social practices and understanding the interaction between individual behavior and the other levels is key to that.
Yeah, as Andreas already explained, assessment of biodiversity awareness of the society constitutes a basis and a starting point to include the relation which the society has with nature in decisions about developments and interventions which concern biodiversity conservation and the sustainable use of natural resources. Talking about the benefits of the new social indicator, it can be said that in general terms, the findings of the assessment serves policy across all sectors, in particular nature conservation policies and nature conservation communication, as well as the fulfillment of reporting obligations at the national level. Here are a few examples. The results of the assessment can serve as basis for developing measures, strategies, and policies concerning or impacting biodiversity conservation, including positions of societies about nature into decision helps to get the acceptance or even the support of the society for the implementation of policies. The results can improve communication campaigns and strategies, given that campaigns can build on scientifically based evidence and not on assumptions. The new indicator can enable the derivation of development targets in a determined period, and the development of the biodiversity awareness for each country can be assessed in a comparable way over time. Next, please. Humans play a major role in the destruction and protection of biodiversity, as everyone knows. Therefore, raising awareness about the values of biodiversity for human life and nature in general, and the steps humans can take towards conservation and sustainable use are of great importance. For this reason, the promotion of biodiversity awareness has been included in various international strategies and agendas. The Convention on Biological Diversity states under Article 13, Public Education and Awareness, that CBD member states shall promote and encourage understanding, develop educational and public awareness programs. The Strategic Plan for Biodiversity 2011 to 2020 states under the Aichi Target 1 that by 2020, at the least, people are aware of the values of biodiversity and the steps they can take to conserve and use it sustainably. Also, to reach various of the global goals of the Sustainable Development Goals, biodiversity awareness and educational programs are essential. The first draft of the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework until now doesn't include a target which refers exclusively to biodiversity awareness, but it states under Target 20 that biodiversity awareness is important for taking decisions. Next.
Thank you very much, Christine. What I would like to do now is give you basic insights why we are changing in Germany our monitoring instrument for biodiversity awareness, which is also the baseline and groundwork for the international assessment together with WWF. So what we can see for the last decades, especially since the Global World Summit in 1992 in Rio de Janeiro, is that on the global and on the national level, our assessment of biodiversity awareness is not very good. It's if countries do assess biodiversity awareness, they do surveys or they conduct surveys, and very often they ask people only just one question: do you think protecting biodiversity is an important political task, or something like that? But we must understand that science is in a totally different place right now. For the last 4 decades, around about 40 years, environmental psychology has achieved so much in understanding human behavior and how environmental friendly behavior is shaped and could even be predicted by assessing specific psychological variables. And we thought it's our obligation to introduce this understanding and this knowledge into the monitoring of biodiversity awareness, especially in order to achieve true transformative change. If we want to achieve true transformative change towards a world living in harmony with nature and living more sustainable, then we must understand the knowledge is already out there. It's out there and it has been produced for the last 4 decades, around about 40 years in social sciences. And now we can introduce this into our work. And what I would like to give you here on this slide is a basic outline about major theories that have shaped the understanding of environmental friendly behavior in environmental psychology. What you can see on the right side of this slide is the norm activation theory. This is a very major theory from Schwartz. Here you see a model from 1981. In basic, it tells you that environmental friendly behavior is shaped by norms, by moral norms, our personal moral norms. What we think should be done is, and what is good and what is right and what is wrong, and what other people think is good and right or bad and wrong. So the idea that norms are shaping behavior is a very important idea in environmental psychology. And what you can see on the left side is another very important theory. It's the theory of planned behavior. Here from Eisen, 1991, a model. Here you can see that behavior is shaped by intention. So environmental friendly behavior needs an intention to do so, to produce such a behavior, to behave in a certain way. So are people willing to do something? Do they want to see something in the world? And as you can see, this intention to do something is shaped especially by attitudes. And attitudes is how you think about an object of your attitude. So do you think this is something you like or you dislike? Is it good or bad? Yeah, for you, but not in a moral way, in a way of an attitude. And the other facet is perceived behavioral control. You can see on the lower part of this model. Perceived behavioral control means, do you think you can show this behavior, or are you prevented from showing this behavior? Do you think you cannot do this? This is too expensive, and so on and so on. So perceived behavioral control is, are you in charge of showing that behavior? And in this model, you also can see that subjective norms has also been introduced. So newer versions of theory of planned behavior is already acknowledging that norms and moral judgment has an influence on your behavior. And so these are the major theories, and what you can see here are also basic variables in environmental psychology that can be assessed, that can be evaluated by questionnaires and also in implementation procedures. And we deemed it necessary to introduce them into our research project. But it does not stop there. The latest findings you can see here. In the last years, statistical analysis has become more sophisticated, and we can see that meta-analytical models is showing us that all the ideas of the major theories are right in general. I present here a very basic meta-analytical model from Bamberg and Moser from the year 2007. And what you can see here in a meta-analytical model, all the major variables of the major theories you have seen before are introduced into this model. So both major theories are true in general. And behavior, environmental friendly behavior is, what you can see here on the right part, is shaped by your behavioral intentions. So what do you want to see in the world? Do you decide to do something? Your intention. And your intention is shaped by PBC, perceived behavior control, your attitudes and norms, moral norms and social norms. And what you can see on the further back of this model, more on the left side, you can see problem awareness and internal attribution. I would like to say 2 sentences about problem awareness. Usually in our sector, we are doing education and information communication solely based on knowledge. So do people understand that biodiversity, that we have problems with the loss of biodiversity and so on? And we want people to know what the term biodiversity means and so on. But you must understand that knowing the term biodiversity and the facets of biodiversity, like ecosystem biodiversity or species richness or diversity within a species, this is some kind of knowledge that is of no worth of influencing or shaping behavior. And even problem awareness, if people are aware that biodiversity in decline, is of some importance, as you can see here in this model. But it's in the farther back of the model, very far on the left side, and it has to move through all the other stages of norms, attitudes, and perceived behavioral control to achieve a change in behavior. So just to give you an idea what we can see in environmental psychology and what we have done so far in the last years in communicating biodiversity loss and so on. And what you can see here is that we need to target other psychological variables that are much more of importance to change behavior. And we have decided for our new setup of the biodiversity indicator to produce a very sound model that respects that we must assess behavioral intentions, but also perceived behavior control and attitude, because they are very important variables for shaping behavior. And then we decided for social norms, not personal moral norms, because this could be a subjective debate on what to assess, but social norms. So what do you think the people around you are thinking is good or right is very influential for shaping behavior. And we also used problem awareness. And what is not part of this model, you can see 2 other variables that are of highest importance in environmental psychology and very explanatory for shaping behavior. That is social identity. So do you, for example, identify as a nature conservationist? So do you think you are one of the persons and you belong to a group that is relevant here? And the other factor is closeness to nature. So do people align to nature? Do they feel that nature is a part of them? This is also a very important psychological factor in explaining environmental friendly behavior. So I've given you here a brief outline about the psychological facets that we are targeting. And all in all, these variables are manifested and presented by 33 items in our indicator. And Christine will give you now examples about our measurement instrument and the indicators.
Okay, thanks, Andreas. On the left side of the table, we see the 10 scales or psychological variables which Andreas described and which form the new social indicator. The first 6 variables are predictors, thus psychological variables which are being used to explain the 4 variables below the predictors. These are the psychological intention variables, which Andreas also mentioned, and which describe ecological friendly behavior. For each of the variables, different items, thus questions or statements, are used to measure the related psychological variable. On the right side of the table, you can see some examples of items or statements. As you can see, for closeness to nature, the item is I'm part of nature, not separated from it. I won't repeat all the items. Important to mention here is that the construction of the statements was tested for comprehensibility in 11 countries in which the surveys took place. It was important to use only statements that have approximately the same meaning for people across borders. This makes the new social indicator, to my knowledge or to our knowledge, the first biodiversity assessment tool that has been tested for transnational applicability. Important for the next slides is to look at the scales. The 6 predictor variables are closeness to nature, problem awareness, social norms, now I don't see them all, okay. Attitude, perceived behavior control, identification with nature conservation groups, and the 4 intention variables are private behavior, lifestyle changes or ecological consumption, collective action, and willingness to pay for nature conservation. On the next 2 slides, I will present the path of a psychological predictor variable towards one intention variable of 2 different countries. I selected the ecological consumption variable, and this illustration serves as an example to show how the new social indicator includes cultural differences instead of delivering one explanation for everyone. Next slide, please. So we see here a structural model of the new social indicator. The results are from the survey conducted in Germany by BFN. And on the far right of the slide, we see the psychological intention variable, eco-consumption. This behavior is 86% explained by the psychological predictor variable attitude. The other psychological predictors variables do not directly lead or explain eco-consumption behavior. So it can be said that Germans become eco-consumers to a great part because of their attitude. Next slide, please. On this slide, we see the structural model of Mexico. On the far right of the slide, we have again the psychological intention variable eco-consumption. In difference to Germany, in Mexico, the psychological intention variable eco-consumption is explained to 51% by the predictor variable attitude. Moreover, the predictor variable social identity also explains the intention variable eco-consumption by 33%. It can be said that Mexicans become eco-consumers because of their attitude and also because of social identity, which means that they feel that they are ecologists or conservationists when they start being eco-consumptionists. While Germans, as we have seen, are eco-consumers mostly because of their attitude. As I already mentioned, I have shown these 2 structural models to illustrate that by using the new social indicator, you can create differentiated profiles of groups of people, communities, cities, and countries that illustrates differences in culture, but also gender, age groups, and so on. We just choose here the differences in between countries. Thanks. Last slide, please.
Okay, now I would like to round this up with the key messages. So what you can see is that we have presented you a standardized monitoring tool for assessing awareness for biodiversity, which can also be used to foster behavioral change, which has been neglected for the last decades in our area. And what we've presented you is an open source tool. So it has been built up in Germany with taxpayers' money, and we would be glad to offer it to the world. And I'm very thankful that we have this this interaction with the CBD Secretariat and with the WWF Germany. that we were able to assess the awareness internationally for now around about 50% of the global population representative. And we would like you to join into our research group. So you can have this indicator and also use it for your country and for your research fields. As Christina said, this must be understood as the first biodiversity awareness assessment tool. So specifically for our sector, that is tested transnational. There are other transnational instruments, no question about that. But for our sector, I think it's the first instrument, or I'm very sure it's the first instrument, I've never seen anything else, that, that is using the state-of-the-art understanding of environmental psychology. This is the global state-of-the-art of environmental psychology. We are working with high-ranked experts publishing in flagship journals for environmental psychology. And this knowledge is now tested on a transnational level for the field of biodiversity awareness. So I think we have a very, very powerful tool never seen before in this sector. And around about 40 years of environmental psychology research were introduced into this instrument. As I've stated, I've shown you the basic variables, what we know are of importance for explaining behavioral intentions and biodiversity awareness. And we know that this can be a very powerful tool for targeting our communication strategies. And as Ariane from RARE already pointed out, this might be also a really good baseline for implementation. So if you want to go to the next level and coach people, this could be a possibility to also already couple this with evaluation. So present a questionnaire before or later and see, do you see a change in the progress? And so you can have very tailored target group specific communication strategies and implementation strategies. And we, so the German Federal Agency for Nature Conservation is using this setup now for assessing awareness as our national monitoring tool. Our data will be published in the next weeks and months, I think in the summer. And we will also publish it on an international level with WWF in the course of the year. And this standardized assessment is running now for 11 countries. And we are very eager to progress with that and extend it. Thank you very much. Thank you for your attention. And now would be glad to have some questions.
Great. Thank you very, very much. Thanks so much, Andreas. Thank you so much, Christine. That's really wonderful. Good work. So I'll open up the floor for questions now. I imagine there'll be a lot. Tom, can I, get you to be our microphone manager? Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Andreas and Christine, for a great presentation. I'm Diogo Verissimo from On the Edge Conservation. I wanted to, I guess, sort of two-part question. The first one was if my understanding is that the sort of end focus is on consumption, and I was wondering if, if I get that right, how well do you think this indicator will work for other nature-related sort of behaviors that are outside of the consumption sphere? And the second one is sort of regarding, going back to Aichi target one, I think one of the challenges we've seen is that it's hard to get the majority of parties, or even a large number of parties, to adopt these sort of large-scale standardized surveys because there are costs attached to them, and all of these things. And so I'm keen to see if is there a commitment from WWF or from Germany to continue to implement this in these 11 countries, or is the expectation that parties will now take this tool and implement it themselves and sort of fund its application? Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Diogo. Andreas?
Thank you, Diogo. Christina, would you like to start?
You can start if you want.
Okay, good. Thank you, Diogo, for this question. For the second part, yes, true. We know that it costs some money, and I think that might have been a problem for the last years and decades that many countries do not make such an awareness assessment. And but I think we've presented you a tool that is now developed, so you can use it. You must not invest in developing a new tool. You can build up on that. So this is something we offer as an open source tool, and I hope that our collaboration with WWF and the CBD Secretariat will progress. And I know that there are ideas to roll out another second international monitoring by WWF. So we will continue with this assessment of awareness with this new indicator. This is definitely true for Germany, because this is the new national indicator for Germany, relating to the international agreements and helping the CBD Secretariat to monitor awareness. But we will progress with our collaboration with WWF, and you are all invited, especially members of the parties, to bring this to your country and to join us, and we have something to build up here. And the first part of your question, Diogo, no, the indicator is not only focusing on consumption behavior. What Christina has shown you was just an example to break down and to make you understand what we are able to do now. That we are able to put behavioral insights and the mechanisms of our mind, to put it somehow under a microscope and to analyze what is truly going on with a collective consciousness. So the collective consciousness of a country, for example, but you could also break it down to smaller groups. And when it comes to part of behavioral intentions, ecological consumption is just one of 4 major facets that is analyzed. And this is not arbitrary. This is also relying on sound environmental psychology research. And we know that ecological consumption is one of a major facet of explaining environment-friendly behavior. But the 3 other facets are also very important. For example, willingness to pay. This is also something that our colleagues from behavioral economics are dealing very much with. So what are people willing to pay for? And this is also introduced. And the other facets, so social behavior, what are you willing to do together with others, working in groups for nature protection, biodiversity on different levels. So
Andreas, maybe you can show the slide 9 just briefly, so then this is 9. Yep. So here you see the predictors and the intentions are the ones which I just chose the ecological consumption from, but not all of them are referring to consumption. Andreas already explained what private behavior is, or collective action and willingness to pay. So you see that it's not always just the consumption part. Okay, thanks.
So you have another question? Go right ahead.
Yes. Hi, everyone. So my name is Maria Sole Bianco from Italy, WorldRise. First of all, thank you, because this is an amazing work and can be super helpful for many organizations also working on the field and more in a local context. Mine is a practical question. I found this super interesting. I found also the presentation before. Are these slides going to be available for us, because we have been struggling taking picture, but
yeah, sure, we will share it. We will share the information. You can also contact if you need more information about the indicator.
Okay, thank you so much.
Do you have other questions? We have a question here in the front, and then you get a question too? No? Okay.
Thank you. I appreciated really very much your presentations and work. 2 questions. First question about the platforms, the context, the environment where this methodology can be tested. I come from academia, so I am thinking about universities, students, how to merge this strategic indicators and methodologies with educational programs.
Yeah.
In order to, sorry, please.
No, sorry. No, thanks for that question. Actually, we are doing exactly what you just said in another project. We are using these insights from the new social indicator, and we are developing a new questionnaires and as well a whole educational program on basis of this new social indicator and some other psychological variables regarding food waste and loss. So this is the new project, and we are really trying to find out which are the psychological variables which help people change their behavior. And on basis of that, we are developing an educational program and as well a communications campaign, and we're developing, with the help of the new social indicator, a new questionnaire which we will start doing before we give the classes to the students, and then afterwards we will do a second and a third questionnaire, a survey with them, so to see if there was some kind of change. And the students who are participating are from the Department of Communication, so they don't have anything to do usually with environmental issues, and we will see how this works. If you want more information, you can contact me as well if you're interested in the second part, of which we didn't present here today, but which is also a part of the approach of path analysis and using psychological variables to measure awareness.
Yeah, thank you so much. We can keep in touch. I don't want to limit other interventions. If we will have a time, I will intervene again.
Sure.
Thank you. Let me add something a little bit to that. Thank you very much for this question. This was a short presentation to give you basic insights. We could talk much longer about it. I'm inviting scientific researchers to contact us and join us. What we've presented to you is a really sound and well-established methodological instrument. We have tested it in the first runs with around about 1,000 respondents in Germany, and now we have data, a second wave of 2,400 respondents in Germany. So this is representative for Germany, and it is also representative for 10 other countries, as Christina said in the beginning, also tested on around about 1,000 respondents. So this is why we can say this is representative. It is fitting to the state of the art of social science research, and I think it can absolutely be said that we are entering a new normal now here. So I'm inviting you to join us, and the possibilities for research are almost endless, because, as you said, this could be applied for educational research, and you can tailor implementation or measurements that are addressing specific variables like that as an intervention. And you could use this indicator to see, does your intervention really change the variables and the effect on behavioral intentions? So thank you very much for this great question.
Great, excellent, thank you very much. Do we have any other questions here in the room? Oh, yeah, I do. We have a question over here. Thanks, Tom. I really appreciate you doing this. Thanks.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Winnie. I'm with IFP, and I just wanted to ask for a clarification, really, on the population that was used to collect the data. Who the population was it students? Was it community members? Who the population was? And just as a follow-up to that, some of the challenges that you possibly came across, especially, well, I'm interested in knowing whether language was a challenge, especially, well, that would be dependent on who the population was, because if those local communities, indigenous peoples, local communities, then language would definitely be an issue. And if that's something that you encountered during your research. Thank you.
Thanks for that question as well. So we started in English, but we had all the questionnaires translated to the local languages. So we didn't use English, for example, in India, but Hindi, or in South Africa, it was, I think, Afrikaans, and in Kenya, Swahili. So even though people are speaking there fluently English, we choose to take the national language as well, not just the second national language, let's say it like that. So we had it by native speakers translated, and after that we had it still proved by WWF national offices. This means that every language was again proved by another national or native speaker who still lives in the country, because sometimes people are not living in their own country, and so we had to check twice. And the population we used, we tried to be representative as well in age, in household differences. So we had families, we had singles, we had couples. We are not just we didn't just interview people from cities or from the capital, but we tried to do it more broadly over the whole countries. All the information is open source. You can look into the data and see which cities or communities have participated in which country as well. And yeah, different educational levels, gender had to be 50-50. So it was, we tried to be really systematic in that it's, that we can at the end illustrate the whole society, not just one part of the society. That was the goal.
Yes, I mean, just commenting, the question of sampling grids and all that is always something for all areas. And so I think one of the questions would be is there an ideal size sampling grid? Would it be so large that it would make it harder if you're going to work with local communities, et cetera? So I guess there's some of that work, but it's good to know there's that template. And I guess that would be part of the work, would be coming up with the community that would help translate the ideas into a variety of local languages as well. Great, thanks. The other thing, Christine and Andreas, with that one is to conduct some of the baseline research. Presumably you could do it either in person or on the internet as well. Is there any difference in effectiveness in gathering that first data depending on the data collection method?
I think Andreas can answer that best, yeah.
You are looking very deep into the crystal ball, David. That is an amazing question, because as Christina already outlined, we have a very sound and clear methodology. It is standardized monitoring for the countries, so sample sizes of over 1,000 persons or people, balanced for basic social demographic variables like income, gender, and so on. This is all fulfilled. So this is a very clean data set. And what you're bringing out now, these are this is an expert question, David. If asking people via face-to-face interviews or online surveys, if this has an influence. For Germany, we are having the data. For this time, in Germany, we have assessed 2,400 respondents. So 1,200 for each online and 1,200 for face-to-face. So real interviews, and we will be able to analyze this and to present this if this might have an influence. But to give you also another sneak preview, I can already tell you it is nothing you should be worried about. We can see that the data is very stable, and so I think we are on a really good track now.
Okay, good. Well, the reason I ask that is I'm reminded of some of these other survey tools we used during the decade, even say the biodiversity barometer. For them, a consideration was cost, was that they had to only do internet-based surveys for a lot of them. And then so one of the questions that came largely from the rest of the colleagues in the biodiversity community is how represented is that, et cetera. And as we pointed out, Diogo pointed out here earlier in his question, is if we're going to do this on an extensive basis, how do we manage this in a fairly cost-effective way? Tom, go ahead.
Thanks. I was just interested to know, and thanks, that was a really wonderful presentation there, actually. And I know we've seen some of this before, and we've looked at some of this before in the flotilla, but did you find any, feel free to say we can talk about this later, did you find any major differences between countries, or do you think that the trends were roughly comparable across all the things? I mean, often we're talking in this sphere globally, and a lot of the time we say, well, actually, that's actually global issues. Everybody's facing the same thing in the same places. But I mean, and we can dig deeper later. But so yeah, were there trends or fairly comprehensive?
Yeah, that's also a cool question. Thanks. So yeah, there are differences. There are surprising differences. For example, in Latin America, Brazil is different than the other 3 countries, Mexico, Colombia, and Peru. As well as South Africa and Kenya, you can see some differences. And some other things are so similar that it becomes also, again, worth to look into it, because if China has a lot of similarities with all the other countries, even though it's politically a different country, closer with Vietnam, then there are coming up also some questions. When we're analyzing the data, there are questions, why is this so similar to let's say to Mexico, even though the economical system is completely different. So the differences are interested, but also the similarities, I would say. And you will find both. You will find as well a lot of differences and similarities. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Let me add just a little bit. What Christine said is absolutely right. And what is really interesting for us is when we were setting up this new indicator and these psychological variables, we were pretty sure that 40 years of environmental psychology research have found out something really important about explaining behavioral intentions and behavior. But what we are not to 100% sure about is, will this structural erosion modeling and this model that was tested in the Western civilization, so United States and Europe and so on, this is where the major research happens in this psychological sector. Will this be functional for states like India or Brazil, or where you could assume that a different cultural background might be of so much influence that the research results of the Western civilization are not applicable? But we would not present here this to you if this would be the case. We should discuss this later in the flotilla and in other settings, and it will be published in the next years. And there will be so much more to come out of that. But what is really of importance is the indicator is functional on a global level, and the basic ideas of environmental psychology are replicated for all the countries we have tested. So it is working, and if you know something about structural erosion modelings, so the fit statistics, the statistics, how good does the model fit the data is really good across all countries.
Great. Okay. Thanks very much. Thanks. So I think we'll probably have to get ready to close because people have got to get ready to move to the afternoon sessions. So listen, Christine, I want to thank you and Andreas very much for putting together this presentation. Tom, I want to thank you for bravely soldiering on with the microphone, etc. And thanks all of you who joined us here in the hall. Those of us who joined us online. So you'll note in the chat, and I think you can see it on the screen there, so copy of the slides and presentation I'll send to you if you send me an email to david.ainsworth@un.org with the title for the message, Communication Side Event. And what we'll do is we'll make sure that you get copies of these presentations. But the other thing I want to note is that Andreas and Christine will have more data about this released in the months to come. So as we move towards the COP, we'll see more information about it. And certainly from my point of view, looking at what I talked about for the communication strategy, this kind of work or this kind of methodology is the sort of thing that we need to do to provide the structuring of messages and campaigns and things like that too. And what I'm hoping is as we move forward in this, the sort of work that Andreas and Christine has done starts a conversation. We bring people like Diogo and our colleague from RARE again to look at that, because I know that there's a lot of richness of experience on this, and we can work on it. So thank you very much to all of you for coming today, for sacrificing your lunchtime. Andreas and Christine, thank you so much for your commitment. Thanks you to all the members online, and we'll talk about this later. Great. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
So the email contacts, if you'll take a look in the chat right there, you'll see that there's my name, and then Christine and Andreas have also. Yeah, exactly.
In the presentation is also the email address.
Yes, the email address. I noticed in the chat or in the e-presentation there too. Good, perfect. Okay. So I'm going to stop the recording now. Stop your recording.